This podcast is part of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Podcast Network. Go to michigansportsandentertainment.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to MSE Countdown with your host, David Rosenberg and Chase Sussex. The countdown starts now.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Countdown. I'm your host, David Rosenberg. I'm here with Chase Sussex. Chase, what's up?
Yo, what's going on, everybody?
It's been another exciting week in Michigan sports. We have a lot to talk about today, and first and foremost, it's the Detroit Lions. Chase, they did not tie this week. They won.
Yeah, and there was a little bit more of a fortunate, outcome this week. The Lions actually came out on top over the San Diego Chargers after, I believe, being the underdog heading into that game. So a big win there.
I betted on them.
Yeah.
Their line was even when I put money on them, but they did pull it out.
Yeah, a big win there. A much needed win after the tie in Arizona last week. So definitely huge for them. They've got a couple of tough games coming up these next couple of weeks before their bye. So I think a win there was definitely huge because I think if they lost there, I mean, it would not look, sort of their outlook wouldn't be very good going to the bye week. So definitely a big win there. Nothing, it wasn't a crazy exciting game by any means. It was pretty low scoring, but I'd say overall a pretty entertaining game to watch if you're a Lions fan. There's definitely a lot of takeaways from that game that I think we can touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I want to mention first before we get started is that I think it's really important that the Lions started off with a win at home because, they were in Arizona last week and the tie was definitely I know it rubbed a lot of my friends who are Lions fans the wrong way. And I think a loss this week would have just set them over the edge. And it's 2 games into the season, and that's too much.
Yeah, exactly. The loss, I like you mentioned, was upsetting for many fans, I'm sure, just because of. Yeah, or that's what I meant to say. Sorry, the tie. They didn't lose. That's sort of my point. Is just the fact that it almost feels like a loss because they were up 17-3 at halftime and they were controlling that game, and they ended up having to go into overtime and barely getting it back to a tie. So the Lions are lucky to get out of there without a loss. They're almost fortunate that they tied that football game. So definitely, I think the importance of that home opener being a win was huge. There were a lot of stakes on the line for that game. I think, for the outcome of the season. So.
Yeah, for sure. I actually wasn't able to catch most of the game because I was on vacation, as you know, Chase. And I did stream most of it on my phone, but when you're with family, how much can you actually pay attention to it? But I watched the fourth quarter in its entirety, so I'll give my thoughts a little bit after. But I know we did 3 stars last week, and if you want to do 3 stars this week, go ahead, but I don't have any. But I kind of want to hear what you thought. Break down the biggest points of the game for me.
So one thing I want to mention, and this is something we saw in week 1 as well, I don't really want to start off on a bad point, I guess, but it's just, the coaching staff has been somewhat of a concern. We saw in this game, especially in the first half, the poor time management skills by Matt Patricia. We saw it plenty last season, and we saw it again in the game on Sunday. It's just the fact that, the Lions had a perfect opportunity to call a timeout, and the defense was about to force a 3-and-out, but no timeout was called, and they ended up running out the clock, and I believe they ended up scoring a field goal at the end of the, and I think it was 10-6 going into the half instead of, 7-6 and possibly, going down there and could have been, 9-7 had there been, had they had called those timeouts. But it didn't happen, and they ended up going down. Mike Williams made a really, really nice catch towards the end of the second quarter, diving catch, and it ended up sending up the Chargers in field goal position, and they scored another field goal before halftime. So that was definitely one of the biggest things that I noticed for the first half, but that's enough for the bad. The Lions, they didn't look great on offense, but Matthew Stafford, continues to look pretty good in Darrell Bevell's offense. I believe he ranks 4th right now in overall passing yards amongst all NFL quarterbacks, which is pretty good.
I believe he threw an interception, right? But if
he did throw an
serves
interception
correctly, it wasn't really his fault.
Yeah, so The two interceptions he threw were kind of weird. He threw a deep ball to Kenny Galladay, and Galladay sort of interfered with the he got called for offensive pass interference. He interfered with the cornerback, or the defensive back, I should say, because I'm not sure if it's a safety or cornerback, but he interfered with him and basically knocked the ball into his hands and forced the interception.
That's the one where he landed on his back, and it was just that if that were a Lions player, he never would have come down with it.
Exactly, yeah. So it was just kind of crazy, just the fact that that would happen. I feel like that's the most Matthew Stafford kind of interception. Unfortunately, he didn't end up finishing the game with 2 interceptions, but I think he looked really strong in that game. Unfortunately, I still think the play calling is restricting him a little bit, but at the end of the day, I don't really think it's that big of a deal. He looked really good. He did pass for a touchdown in the first half. It was a really nice, I believe, it was a screenplay to Kerryon Johnson. He fumbled the ball a little bit, or bobbled it before he made the catch, and then he showed off his speed, and Kerryon rushed 30-something yards for a touchdown. So that was a really impressive play.
I believe it was a 36-yard touchdown, and I know that because he's on my fantasy team.
I know. I tweeted out over on our Twitter at MSE Countdown, if you guys aren't following already. I tweeted out that David, after that touchdown, that David's fantasy team would be really happy about that. But yeah, Kerryon Johnson looked really good in that game. I think they're looking to give him more opportunities to run the football. I hope they end up making him a third down back, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later with some of the news that we have in terms of the Lions running back situation. But I think Kerryon Johnson is going to see more touches in the coming weeks. I'd really like to see them, incorporate him in the offense more. He's really big in the passing game, but I just want to see them rush him more often and have more confidence with him on third down and short situations. Mm-hmm. But the use of Kerryon Johnson is something the offense really needs to take advantage of. Only 6 points for the Lions in the first half, but really it could have been 10. Matt Prater missed an extra point as well as a 40-yard field goal. So it could have been 10-10 at half, but some special teams issues there definitely kind of hurt the Lions earlier in that first half, especially Jamal Agnew as well ended up being replaced on special teams.
He didn't get cut, did he?
No, he hasn't gotten cut yet, but there's a lot of people who think he
close.
Is. Yeah, he's getting real close. He's had some close calls. He has not been very good on special teams. A lot of people are thinking that he might be off the roster pretty soon. But it sounds like Patricia still has faith in him. They said he wasn't really benched. They just said that it seemed like it was the right move at the time to move on from.
He was too much in his head. That game. They could have risked that.
Exactly. And it
turned out to be a good move. It was a close game, anyways. You talked about Prater. He missed a field goal and an extra point, and he made good on the second extra point that he kicked. But are you at all concerned about Prater? I mean, the special teams as a whole have been pretty bad this year. Let's not forget that Sam Martin's been a fantastic punter, in my opinion, and he has been for the last several years. But you have, on the field goal side of things, the kicking side of things, and the return side of things with Agnew. I mean, both of those are concerning. How do you remedy it?
I don't know. For me, I think it's one of those things where I feel like Prater had one off game. I think it's a little bit tough. I'm surprised that he had issues in Ford Field, where it's, an indoor stadium. He didn't have any kind of weather conditionings hindering him, which I thought was interesting. But I think every kicker sort of, gets one bad game where they aren't really, on their game. But hopefully he'll be back. I don't really think that's anything to be super concerned about. I think it's just, one of those games where you just didn't have as good of a game. I'm really confident in Prater, just the fact that he's been such a good kicker for a really long time. Not really concerned at all in that aspect, but I definitely think that, they might need to move on from Agnew on special teams. The fumble he had in week 1 ended up leading to a touchdown for Arizona, and, he had some costly turnovers as well, in the game against the Chargers, and that kind of stuff just can't happen. It's frustrating to to kind of witness that and then see him return on special teams. They ended up putting Amendola, I believe, back there. But even Amendola, or I think Ty Johnson, the running back they drafted out of Maryland, would be a better special teamer than Jamal Agnew. I think his speed would work really well on kick returns and punt returns. So I think that'd definitely be an interesting aspect. I think Agnew is the only one I'm worried about. Prater, not so much.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there.
So, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of other positives from that game. The Lions defense, despite giving up a lot of yards, still looks really good. I think one player that a lot of people have caught their eye on is Jelani Tavai, the second-round linebacker out of Hawaii. The Lions took in the most recent draft. He ended up forcing a fumble on the goal line from Austin Eckler and saved a touchdown that would have given the Chargers an even bigger lead. I think everyone is, he is proving everyone wrong in the sense that a lot of people didn't really like the pick on day 2. He was a second-round pick, and a lot of people thought he would go like late day 3. But he's looking like a great pick so far. He's filling in really well for Jared Davis. I think when Jared Davis returns, he'll play even better. I think Jared Davis will move to the outside linebacker position, and he'll continue to play really well. And he'll get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, I think, and Tavai will stay strong at that middle linebacker position. And I think that's really important going forward for the linebacking core, because Tavai, like I said, has been really good, and then Devon Kennard has also been fantastic. Like you mentioned last week, he had 3 sacks. Didn't have a huge impact in this game, but it was definitely interesting to watch. And speaking of pressure, there was another big thing where it was Taylor Decker, who had a rough game in Arizona, actually did not play due to back issues against the Chargers, and he ended up getting replaced by Tyrell Crosby. And a lot of people were concerned about the fact that they have Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, 2 of the most powerful pass rushers in the league. Actually got
Joey Bosa got hurt towards the end of the game, right?
Yeah. He got hurt towards the end of the game, but still, Melvin Ingram is really good. He's still an incredibly good pass rusher, and I think he only allowed 2 pressures the entire game, and I don't think the Chargers got a single sack in that game. So that was really crucial there. Crosby filled in really well in Decker's absence. I think that's important.
Just about anyone could have done better than Decker did.
Better than his performance last week. I agree. I still do think Decker is good. I think it was sort of a fluke week, but I think Crosby definitely did play well in his position, and I think that's positive. A positive sign, because he did have a rough preseason. A lot of people were worried about how he was going to do headed into this game, and he played really well, especially against some of the top talent in the league on defensive end. So really positive there. I think the Lions, really sort of grinded out a win there. A late catch from Kenny Golladay in the 4th quarter. I know you said you watched the 4th quarter. If you want to, sort of give some of your input here, but I was
surprised by the score for most of the game. It seemed pretty low, and I figured that the Lions would do a little more scoring. I predicted before the game that Kerryon Johnson was going to have a big week. He didn't exactly have the week that I wanted him to, but he did, score like you mentioned. But I think the 2 biggest plays of the game, no doubt, were the Kenny Golladay touchdown in the 4th quarter, which was an absolute bullet for Matthew Stafford. I mean, that's the kind of throw that I point to when people question if he's a good quarterback, if he's elite or not. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far to say he's elite, but he's definitely in the upper echelon of quarterbacks, in my opinion, because he can make those throws. Just not everyone has the touch and the arm power to make such a beautiful strike that really Golladay was the only one who could catch it, and he did. And I thought, that was one of the greatest plays of the day, and I'm sure, every Lions fan just rejoiced at that moment because, hey man, we're gonna win this one. And then obviously the other big play was the Darius Slay interception. Darius Slay kind of got hounded all day by Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's one of the best receivers in the league, in my opinion, and he gets a lot of targets from Phillip Rivers. They've worked together for a long time. They know each other. They know how they want to work. And Slay probably, being an NFC corner, probably doesn't, hasn't seen Allen. I don't know if he's seen him ever, but definitely not a lot. You know what I mean? So he's an unfamiliar guy. He's one of the better, players in the league. And a lot of people were making this big to-do about, I think Allen had like 8 receptions or something. And he had 8 caught receptions. More than 50% of his targets. But the one that counted, he didn't catch. Darius Slay caught it. And I think that just kind of shows exactly who Darius Slay is. You've played sports before. You had a tough game. You get down on yourself, right? It's really hard to keep your head up and have that mental fortitude to be able to make such a big play, a game-winning play, a game-saving play, in the last seconds of the game. So I think those 2 plays, no doubt, were the best ones, and I'm glad that I got to catch it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, though, is you were talking about, Tavai and Kennard, and there's a lot of good things happening with the young defensemen on the Detroit Lions. But I know there's some concern surrounding one of the, not the veterans of the Lions, but veterans in the league, Damon Harrison. What's going on with him? Does he have a tackle this year?
I guess he struggled a little bit earlier. I haven't really seen some of his stats, but he definitely hasn't made a huge impact. In the first game, he ended up tweeting out something after the game, and he said, "Oh, it's like he was blaming the game on himself." And a lot of people said, that's not really his, any of his fault. But in the game against the Chargers, you definitely did seem to see some of his issues that he might have had starting early. I know Eckler pretty much was running all over the Lions in the beginning of the game, and a lot of that was due to the lack of presence of Damon Harrison. He really wasn't enforcing his will in the beginning of that game, and it ended up leading to an Austin Eckler touchdown. So his struggles early are a little bit concerning, but I don't really think it's necessarily a long-term sort of thing that I'm super worried about. I'm confident in the fact that he deserved the extension he got, and he's one of the best interior defensive lineman in the league. He's great at run stopping. I think it's just he didn't practice very much in the offseason. I think it's just him getting sort of back in football speed and gaining his footstep, kind of brushing up the rust, sort of like what we said with Trey Flowers last week, and just the fact that even though he's had a slow start, he's only had 3 tackles, I believe, and no sacks.
Mm-hmm.
He's sort of just getting back into getting used to playing football, and it'll take a couple weeks. We're not going to see.
I think those excuses are only going to hold up for the fans a few more weeks, 1 or 2, and then they're going to start demanding results. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. But I tend to agree with you that players need some time to get into the groove of things, and ultimately, the Lions have not lost a game. So whatever they're doing is working to some degree, and they just have to continue to improve. So one big thing that the Lions did, I think just today or perhaps it was yesterday, was they released running back C.J. Anderson.
Yes, that was a really big move that I was actually caught off guard by. C.J. Anderson was a big acquisition in the offseason. A lot of people, saw his performance in the NFC Championship game against the Saints, and he played really well. I mean, I think he had like 2 touchdowns, like 200+ rushing yards in the playoffs. Played really well. He was very solid. And the Lions ended up actually putting 2 claims on 2 different Rams running backs. Excuse me. They first tried to claim Malcolm Brown, who's the current backup in LA, but they ended up actually, I think, matching their offer on the offer sheet. LA, that is. So they ended up actually signing C.J. Anderson instead. And clearly, the Lions had wished they got Brown, because Malcolm Brown has played really well this year, and C.J. Anderson didn't necessarily perform to his best because he ended up getting cut by the Lions.
Yeah, they decreased his role in the second game, and he was actually only averaging 2.7 yards per carry. So like 2 3/4 yards per carry isn't exactly great, but the Lions signed him back in April to kind of be a short yardage and third down back. So a short yardage guy. If he's getting 3 yards a carry, I mean, I'm not saying it's good, but I mean, if he's just supposed to be a small little bowling ball that you push through when you need to get those 2 yards, I feel like he was doing that this season. I know you said you were caught off guard, but is the silver lining here that Kerryon Johnson is now going to be the 3-down back we all kind of expected him to be when last season ended?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing that we're seeing here. I think, actually, to be honest with you, I know his numbers are saying that he's averaging around 3 yards per carry, but on those 3rd and 1 situations, you saw him against, you saw him all the time against the Chargers. I mean, he wasn't picking up those first downs. Anderson just wasn't doing it. He wasn't getting the job done on 3rd and short, and I think that's where the Lions need to start trusting Kerryon Johnson. I think going forward, that's going to be incredibly important. I think he is a 3rd down back. He has the elusiveness and even the power to be a 3rd down back. I think he is a 3-down back. That should be out in the field for the majority of the game. But something I'm really excited about, and I mentioned this earlier. Ty Johnson, the kid out of Maryland, the Lions just drafted recently, is now slated to be the Lions' number 2 running back. Even though the Lions did end up signing Paul Perkins, or they claimed Paul Perkins from the New York Giants while they cut C.J. Anderson, I think that Ty Johnson will end up taking the running back 2 role over, and I think that's really exciting. He looked really good in the preseason. He had 5 carries for 30 yards in the game against the Chargers. He had a really good preseason. He has scored a touchdown against the Bills in the preseason, and he's looked really good. His speed, I believe he ran a 4.32 40-yard dash.
He's quick.
And he didn't Yeah, he that was at Maryland's pro day. He didn't end up getting invited to the combine, but at Maryland's pro day he was clocked in at a 4.3240. Pretty much everyone in Detroit, all the media is saying it's pretty darn close. That's very accurate to what he runs, because he's very fast, very elusive, and they're trying to get him involved in the passing game as well. A little bit of a sort of discount Theo Riddick there. He's not as much of a pass catcher. Didn't really do too much of that at Maryland. Yeah, but he didn't really do too much of that at Maryland. But I think, if he can get involved in the passing game, I think he'll definitely be lethal. Him and Kerryon both are quick and are elusive. So I think those are two really good backs to have. I'm really excited to see what Ty Johnson can do. He as the RB3 in the game against the Chargers, he still had 5 rushes for 30 yards in that game.
He actually played as the RB2 above Anderson.
Yeah, I guess he did surpass him.
He was the number 2 back. I mean, just by, the vision test kind of proves.
Yeah.
But you're right that he's going to stay in that role, because Perkins hasn't appeared in a game since 2017. And I think that year he made 4 starts and ran for about 90 yards with the Giants. So he's, he was out all last season with a torn pectoral. So, Johnson's the guy definitely behind Johnson. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So it'll be Johnson and Johnson, and then J.D. McKissick is also there in Detroit. I don't really think he'll get too much of a volume share. He might get minimal involvement, but honestly, Kerryon Johnson is still the clear-cut RB1. And for any fantasy fans out there, I think Ty Johnson is worth looking at in deeper leagues, because I think he will get some work, but I think Kerryon Johnson will just see larger volume as well. So I think going forward, he's just sort of the guy to go with. I know for David, I'm sure he won't be sitting Kerryon Johnson for Ty Johnson anytime soon.
I doubt it. But he could be worth grabbing, like you said, in deeper leagues. There's always the idea that, if someone goes down, you want to have their backup, right? So at the very minimum, you can hold the person hostage that does have Kerryon Johnson if he goes down for Ty Johnson. So that's definitely an idea there. Chase, anything else on the Chargers game? We're going to talk about next week's game against the Eagles a little bit later in the show, but anything else on this week?
I think we covered everything in the Chargers game. Big game next week, though, and a really good win for the Lions, I think, overall.
Yeah, definitely a good week in Detroit. I know my weeks are a lot better when the Lions win, and I hope that our listeners are too, and they can actually be happy for once, because it's tough out there being a Lions fan. And our second story brings us to another fan base that it's tough to be a part of right now. The Michigan State Spartans had a rough week in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. They ended up playing the Arizona State Sun Devils again after they played them last year, ended up losing. And again, they ended up losing to the Sun Devils in they were, I believe, in East Lansing, which is a huge loss at home, for the Spartans. Definitely not the outcome they were looking for there. Michigan State's offense continues to look very poor. It looks like Lewerke really just doesn't know what he's doing. The play calling is really bad. The offensive staff's play calling is limiting Lewerke very much. The defense looks fantastic. I mean, they still single-handedly have one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in college football right now. But they're completely throwing it in the garbage with their terrible offense. They have no ability to run the football. Lewerke is overthrowing passes and just does not look good. And it is simply down to the play calling. They don't have good blocking either, so Lewerke's got pressure in his face quite often. And it's frustrating as if you're a Spartans fan. I'm certainly not a Spartans fan, so I guess it's not frustrating for me. But as a Spartans, if I were a Spartans fan, I would be frustrated in the play calling.
Yeah, I'm sure half our listeners are Spartans fans, so let's not alienate them just yet. This was a tough one. I think 10-7 was the final score, right?
Yes, 10-7 was the final score. They lost on a really bad note. I can't remember the kicker's name, but Michigan State's kicker ended up actually making the first field goal, but I think there was a flag, if I'm not mistaken, and it ended up pushing him back, and he missed the 46-yard field goal by a mile. I mean, he didn't come anywhere close. And a lot of Michigan State fans were saying there was a penalty. They were saying that someone, I can't remember what it was. It was like a legal motion or something like that. It should have been. There was some sort of 15-yard penalty that was.
Yeah, I think the replays proved that an Arizona player jumped or did something incorrectly that should have resulted. And I'm pretty sure that the Pac-12 has admitted that at this point, that there was kind of a blown call there.
Yeah, but it's tough. I mean, when it's a 3-point game, Michigan State's kicker had already missed 2 field goals earlier in that game. It's just this kind of thing that you can't do. I mean, it's frustrating. I get there was a penalty there, and that does change the tide of the game. It would have been a tie game, and that's tough to say, but it's one of those things where sometimes you have to overcome that stuff. And, to only put up 7 points of offense against an unranked Arizona State team is just, it's just embarrassing, to be honest with you. When you pay a team money to come play you again for the second straight season and you lose to them for the second straight season,
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to stop scheduling them.
I was going to say, you think Arizona State's going to be on Michigan State's schedule anytime soon?
Absolutely not.
I'm sure. Can't imagine.
Yeah, and I'm sure Army won't be on Michigan's schedule anytime soon either. So, it definitely goes ways for sure. But, definitely a bad loss there for Michigan State. Hopefully they can rebound next week. I'm not exactly sure who they play. I'm going to have to, check in on that. I believe, if I'm correct, I know Michigan has a big matchup, but Michigan State, it plays Northwestern next week.
Yes,
I believe
the
their
Big Ten schedule starts next week.
Yeah, so I believe Michigan State is a pretty big favorite in that game.
Yeah,
I believe
they're going to get back on track, and they're going to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard D'Antonio's comments after the game, and nothing specific was out there, but it was just kind of the tone. He was pissed. He wasn't happy about the way the game turned out. And I'll admit, I'm a Michigan fan, but Michigan State there were a lot of penalties called in that game. And, ultimately at the end, the penalties are what did them in. But it probably shouldn't have been that close of a game to start with. You know what I mean? So it's neither here nor there. But I do think that they're going to bounce back big towards Northwestern. So let's focus on Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yeah, so Michigan, Wisconsin. Michigan actually enters this game in as the underdog. So it's definitely an interesting aspect here. They have to go up against Jonathan Taylor, who is a Heisman candidate for this season. As a junior, he looks really, really good. He'll probably go to the NFL after this season. He looks fantastic this year. And Michigan is not going to have an easy game. I mean, they had a close double overtime victory over Army. And, they've had a bye week to sort of adjust and sort of get ready for this game. But I think Michigan definitely is in trouble if they continue to play like they have recently. Shea Patterson has had a huge issue with turnovers. He's already had 4 fumbles so far this season. He just can't do that. He has to hold on to the ball in order for Michigan to be able to get a win over Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a very good football program. And if they're not careful, I mean, that game could be a blowout in favor of Wisconsin.
Yeah, it all comes down to that offense in Michigan, like you said. Patterson's got to be able to hold on to the ball. I know they had 3 turnovers, I believe all fumbles, in the first half of the Army game. And that's just kind of that's what put them down at the first half, you know what I mean? And when you're playing from behind in the second half, it's just no good when you're a team like Michigan, or a team that's supposed to be as good as Michigan truly is. Aside from the quarterback situation, let's talk about the running back situation. I know that Charbonnet is questionable.
Yeah, Zach Charbonnet, he's had, I believe, almost 200 yards rushing. I think it's 191 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns through his first 2 games. All 3 of them came against Army. But he is questionable heading into this game. It's an undisclosed injury. There's a lot of speculation sort of going around, but there's no true hard facts on what's going on with his injury or whether he's actually injured or not. He's just listed as questionable for the game against Wisconsin, so we're not going to speculate too much. But speaking of injuries, offensive lineman John Runyon is back in the starting lineup. He'll start at left tackle against Wisconsin, which would be very big. And then there's a lot of word that Donovan Peoples-Jones might be back for the Wisconsin game, and that'll be huge. Yeah, exactly. It'll help open up Michigan's passing game a lot more. Some of the Michigan's wide receivers have looked pretty good. Nico Collins always looks good. Tariq Black and Ronnie Bell as well have all looked pretty good. But Donovan Peoples-Jones is definitely the big game changer there. I think once he gets back, I think Michigan's whole speed and space offense might be able to take off. But it definitely has not looked very promising so far early this season. All of the hype in the offseason that Josh Gaddis' offense, whole speed and space offense got, we're just not seeing it. I need to see it a lot more against Wisconsin. If Donovan Peoples-Jones does end up playing, I need to see a whole lot of action there. Need a lot of wide receiver play, especially if Charbonnet doesn't end up playing in the game either. I think they should air the ball plenty during Wisconsin, and they just have to go at him. I want to see Shea. I want to see 300 yards from Shea. Maybe that's a little unrealistic, but
I mean, it's not. It's a big week. It's kind of like how the Lions had, this week against the Chargers. It's a game that they have to go out there and win, And if the Wolverines don't win, I don't know that the fans are going to have any confidence in not just the team, but in Jim Harbaugh, right? Because as go the Wolverines, as goes Jim Harbaugh, and things move quickly in 2019. You can lose your job and the drop of a dime. So, if they lose against Wisconsin, this could be the beginning of a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If they lose against Wisconsin, I'm not confident for the rest of their season. It certainly doesn't bode well for their game against Ohio State later in the season, even though the game's in Ann Arbor. Or Penn State. They've also got Notre Dame later in the season.
Who knows?
Yeah, even Michigan State. They got, like I said, they got Notre Dame. I mean, they got a tough schedule. They have Iowa as well. Their schedule is definitely not a cakewalk this year. They're gonna need to show up a lot of these games. So a big statement win over Wisconsin here. I think will prove a lot of people wrong. I know there's a lot of people going into this game who think that Michigan's gonna lose. I think it's very possible that they could if they don't play it correctly. But I think Michigan's does have a lot. They have a lot of talent. They have the arsenal to beat Wisconsin, but they just need to play their cards right.
Let's talk about rankings for a second here. Michigan State, with their loss, fell out of the top 25, so they're now unranked. They started the season, I believe, around 21, but I'm not sure if that's right. And then Michigan, of course, started at, I think, 7, and they've dropped to 11, right? They were 10, and now they're 11 after a bye week. So what do you see moving forward? The road to the college football playoff is progressively getting harder, and what do they have to? Does Michigan just have to win out? Does Michigan State have any chance anymore? What's going on?
If Michigan State doesn't get their offense figured out, I don't really think they ever see the top 25 ever again. I think they'll get it figured out next week against Northwestern, and they might crack the top 25 again. But it's definitely tough. That offense definitely needs to get figured out before they're even back in the top 25 situation. In terms of Michigan, I think they definitely do have to win out. Maybe they can have one loss snuck in there, but I think it's really tough. I feel like they need a big statement win over Ohio State to even consider being
I was going to say
contenders.
The loss can't be against Ohio State. The loss would have to be against Notre Dame or another tough team, right? Like Notre Dame's the one that makes sense because if Notre Dame has a really good season, then it's arguable, and they could actually schedule like a rematch in the college football playoff, which is something that I know the TV producers would eat up. So
yeah, absolutely. It's one of those big things where they almost can't afford to lose one game. I mean, it's definitely tough. Nothing that Michigan has showed me so far has shown at all that they have a chance to beat Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State just looks leagues ahead of Michigan right now.
Yeah.
But things could change by the time that game comes around. Maybe they'll shock us, maybe they won't. I'm not really sure, but
for them to have a chance, they do need to beat Ohio State.
Absolutely,
exactly what
yeah.
you said.
Mm-hmm. So they need to win pretty much all their divisional games. So they need a big win over Penn State, Michigan State, Iowa, and Ohio State. They need those big wins. Notre Dame even further, propels them into that sort of conversation of the playoffs. I know they have received a lot of playoff hype in the beginning of the season, and I just don't know if they're going to live up to that. So they definitely need, a couple of big wins. I mean, they've got 5 crucial wins on their schedule if they want to make the playoffs. So right now, as a Michigan fan, I don't really think you're worried about playoffs at this moment in time. I think you're worried about mainly, you're worried about Wisconsin this week, and I think you're worried about Ohio State. Even, I mean, they need to win that game. I mean, it's just one of those games where it's just gotten too heavily. The rivalry has leaned too heavily on Ohio State's side. They haven't won in quite a long time. So they need to sort of bring that back. And, Michigan sort of needs to take it one game at a time and sort of focus on that aspect rather than trying to look ahead and, try to prospect the playoffs. But definitely something interesting going forward.
For sure. And now that we've talked about football for our good 30 minutes, let's move on to our third topic of the night, and that's going to be the Detroit Tigers. We've talked about the Tigers all season, and it's been pretty low, to say the least. They were the first team to hit 100 losses this year. If they continue at this pace, they'll probably end up with 116, 117 losses on the season. They just lost to the Cleveland Indians tonight, 2-1, but I was actually in attendance, which is part of my vacation. I live in Florida, as I think I mentioned on the show before, so my vacation is to Michigan to get to see some baseball. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the Lions game, but I did get to watch baseball, and I have to say that it was a really good time watching the two worst teams in the league play some baseball. And I know that might be shocking for a lot of you, but I was at the second game of the Baltimore Orioles and Detroit Tigers series, and it was Chase, I don't know if you caught the scores, but it actually ended in a walk-off grand slam in the bottom of the 12th inning.
Really? I hadn't really seen the game. I don't really think anyone was tuning into that game unless you were there. That's definitely a tough game to watch when two of the worst teams in the league face off. It's not necessarily must-see TV.
Well, but it is. You see, the thing about baseball is you can tank, okay? And the Tigers are in full tank mode. And they, forgive me, I forget the name of this draft pick, but he's a first baseman, and he absolutely rakes home runs. He's got some a funny name like Velostoy. I can't remember it, but I'll come up with it next week. But he's the pretty clear number one pick here. So the Tigers are in play, and the Orioles at the time were only about 3 games behind them for the first overall pick. So to secure that pick, I mean, it's the difference between, we've talked about Casey Mize a bunch this year, right? Mm-hmm. You know how good Casey Mize is. So imagine not having Casey Mize. This rebuild would be a whole lot more depressing. It was kind of exciting because the joke I had with my family going into the game was, look, it's a four-game series. We just need them to win the one that we went to. And that turned out to be a really good game that we got to go to and see. And it was actually very encouraging because the Tigers played good baseball pretty much throughout it, except for the 8th and 9th on the pitching side, right? They gave up, Brian Garcia gave up the lead in the 8th inning on a 3-run homer after the Tigers had led 1-0 for the majority of the day, and they attacked on the second run. Harold Castro hit a home run to get that second run, and then Victor Reyes hit a home run in the bottom of the 9th to tie up the game 3-3, which was very exciting. And you just kind of felt, and you wouldn't feel this at a Tigers game if you were watching it on television, but when you're at Comerica Park and you see them, the young guys, playing as hard as they can, I just kind of felt that, man, Victor Reyes has a chance to take this one out. And of course he did, and that's how we went to extras, and the game kept going and going and going. They loaded the bases, and I think the Tigers actually were down a run or so, but then they loaded the bases, they scored a run, and then John Hicks hit the walk-off grand slam for the victory, which was really just, I'd say, man, there was somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people at Comerica Park that night. And if you've ever been to Comerica on a night where the place is packed, I mean, I've been to plenty of playoff games and things like that, and it's just an electric feeling. You could feel that from the 5,000 to 10,000 people that were in there. I mean, when the home runs were hit, those fans are the loudest people you've ever heard in the world. Just at the end of an abysmal season, they stuck it out in a 12-inning game and saw what proved to be probably one of the most magical moments of the season. So I was really happy to be there, and I want to encourage you guys that even though we talk about, especially on this show, how bad the Tigers are and how depressing they are, that there is still some worth, especially going to see the live games. There's really nothing like watching your baseball team play some good baseball, and you never really know when that's going to be with the Tigers, but it's worth going because, let me tell you, when it happens, it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, it sounds like an exciting time. I'm glad you enjoyed your time at Comerica Park. I know a lot of people, a lot of players, especially, for example, Nick Castellanos, sort of talked about, the struggles of, just talked about the struggles of, the fans and stuff like that at Comerica Park. And, just the fact that, maybe there is still some electricity despite such bad play from the Tigers right now.
Yeah, and I think the young, one thing that I've said, and in some of our articles on MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com, we've said this too, is that they're not playing. The Tigers aren't playing for the postseason by any means, but the players are still playing for something, be it a roster spot in Detroit next year or a roster spot somewhere else, right? Some of these guys are going to leave the Tigers, but you see how a guy like Jose Iglesias can leave and turn out to do really well in the Cincinnati Reds, okay? So these guys still want to play baseball, no matter what the management is doing to try to make them lose, seemingly. So, three guys I just want to talk about real quick. I said Harold Castro earlier. He's actually hitting. He was hitting 305 the other day. I don't know what it was after this game, but he's batting over 300. He got his 100th hit on the season. He just looks to be someone who's going to be in Detroit's lineup in 2020. And then the other guy I want to talk about was another person who hit a home run in that game that I was at, Victor Reyes. He was also batting near 300, and I just think he made a diving grab early in the game, and it just seemed like he was pretty much all over the field. Like his name was coming up whenever something positive was happening for the Tigers, which is the kind of association you want if you're a young player moving up in a team, right? Like, who really wants Jacoby Jones if you have a guy like Victor Reyes? So I think those two are really important. And Tyler Alexander picked up his first win, I believe, on Sunday. It could have been Monday. But Tyler Alexander picked up his first win after a shaky start. He had two good starts and then a couple shaky ones, giving up 4 runs apiece. But he got his first win, and he looked pretty good. He went 6 innings, which he needed because the Tigers had a bullpen day before that and going after that. So people are solidifying their names, and you're going to start to hear these names more and more, especially as the rebuild hopefully comes to a close and the Tigers can get themselves back to kind of where we expect them all to be. So enough talking about the Tigers. I'll get off my pedestal and telling people to enjoy Tigers games. Let's talk about another rebuilding franchise for our fourth story of the day. Chase, that's the Red Wings. Preseason started. What's going on?
Yeah, the Red Wings are back in action. Definitely the most exciting time of the year for me, especially as a Red Wings writer.
What, the preseason, so you don't have to talk about how bad they are in the regular season?
Yeah. Well, I think the preseason is really fun because you get to see, it's sort of a lot like, any preseason in any other sport. So like the Lions, for example. You're seeing a lot of young prospects and guys who are competing for roster spots, and I think that's really important. I think that's exciting to see. You see guys who are, sort of on the cusp of making the roster, compete and try to, just prove that they're able, their main roster material. In the first game, they're in a series right now with the Chicago Blackhawks. The Red Wings actually picked up their first win, 5-3 yesterday, last night. Michael Rasmussen is the center prospect for the Detroit Red Wings, and he actually picked up the game-winning goal on the power play. He ended up getting the assist from Hirose and Svechnikov. It was a really great goal. He was super hyped over that. The Red Wings ended up winning 5-3, but he scored that fourth goal. Their final goal, I believe, was an empty netter, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely exciting for him. You kind of like to see that fire from a guy who's sort of on the rocks in terms of making the roster. He had an up and down season last year, but his size and his his ability on the power play has been really good. Again, he scored a big power play goal to win the game. So his size, they'll look for him to sort of impose his will this season and potentially make the roster. I really like Michael Rasmussen as a prospect. Really good center play. He plays a lot smaller than his size in terms of his speed. Like, he just looks a lot faster than he actually should be. I believe he's like 6'5", if I'm not mistaken. So, the kid is really good.
6'5" and a kid, Chase. That's a man.
Yeah, that's a man. Yeah, but I believe he's only like 20. I think he's like something like 21 years old or something like that. He's young. Well, he's young in some standards. He's older than I am, but just in that sense, I think it's great to see guys like that. Like I said, he got the assist from Svechnikov. Excuse me, that's a little bit of a tongue twister. And he looked good in his first game back. He ended up, I believe, he tore a ligament, I believe, last year. I can't remember if it was his ACL or not. But he ended up injuring himself in a game last season. I believe it was in the preseason last year that he ended up hurting himself. And he missed pretty much the entirety of last season, and he looked really good in his debut in the preseason. And the Red Wings also played today, ended up falling 2-1 to the Blackhawks. The lone goal came from Tar Hirose. Again, has looked really good both in camp and in the preseason so far. He had an assist in the last game. and had a goal from Joe Veleno and Philip Zadina. If anyone watched the red and blue game in the camp, in the development camp, that was basically the entirely first line for all of camp was Joe Veleno, Philip Zadina, and Taro Hirose, and that line basically tore it up. They were scoring like crazy. That's pretty much the future line right there for the Detroit Red Wings. This was Zadina's first game of the preseason. He did end up playing in the first game, but he was active for the second game, and he ended up assisting on the on the Taro Hirose goal. It was a right place, right time goal. I believe he shot at the goalie. It gave a big rebound, and Hirose was standing right there to put the puck in the back of the net. So definitely really big there. Joe Veleno, like I said, ended up looking really good in camp. He's looked fantastic pretty much all season. He's definitely a pick to make the Grand Rapids Griffins roster this season. Could potentially even see a Red Wings call-up. And Zadina is looking poised to make the main roster this season. I think Taro Hirose will also make the main roster this season, which is really exciting. Hopefully they possibly get paired up at some point this season. And, they'll look to possibly score some more goals like they have in camp so far. So I think it's been a positive outlook for the Red Wings, even though they did end up falling and losing their first game of the preseason. Overall, I think the Red Wings are really proud, or should be really proud of the depth that they've created. Another player who's looked really good on defense is Moritz Seider, the kid they drafted, I believe it was 6th overall in the 2019 draft. A lot of people were sort of surprised by that, but he's looked really good. A lot of people were saying that he was planning on going back to Germany, but now he's actually not. He's probably going to stay in the U.S. depending on how his preseason plays out. He's been playing in the preseason, and he looks like he's going to stay in the U.S. and play for Grand Rapids. So that would be absolutely huge for his development. For him to be able to play in Grand Rapids this early in his career is really good for his development. Like I mentioned, only good things here for the Red Wings. It looks like Yzerman has them in the right direction. So super exciting. I don't really think the Red Wings are going to necessarily be a contender anytime soon this season, but I think the Grand Rapids Griffins are definitely going to be a team to keep your eye on, because you'll see guys like Svechnikov's Veleno and Seider possibly this season. But the Red Wings also have some players to look out for as well. So I definitely encourage you guys to stay tuned to the Red Wings. I'm sure you guys will hear plenty of content from us. Their first actual regular season game is in October. I believe it's the 24th of October, if I'm not mistaken. I might correct myself, but I believe they do open up sometime towards the end of October. They end up actually playing. Let me double check here. They end up actually opening up against the Predators actually early October. They end up opening the 5th of October against the Nashville Predators. Their home opener, I believe, is against the Dallas Stars on the 6th. But their first game of the NHL of this season will be on the 5th of October at 8 p.m. In Nashville. So that'll definitely be exciting. I know a lot of people are looking forward to Red Wings hockey again, even though their season last year wasn't too good. But I'm definitely, still super excited to watch them this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we've kind of talked about it, that I'm not the biggest hockey fan in the world, but I'm going to try to catch a few Red Wings games, and maybe you can explain them to me and what it all means, and I'll start giving my analysis once the season gets underway. I wanted to probe you for a little bit and put you on the spot here, I guess, and ask you to make a prediction for the Red Wings record this year.
Ooh, that's a little bit tough. I think the Red Wings finish around. I think they'll finish second to last in the Atlantic. I think they'll finish pretty similarly to where they were last year. They finished 32, 40, and 10 last year with 74 points. I believe that is good for 7th place in the division, right in front of the Ottawa Senators. I think the Red Wings actually could have a chance to be worse than the Senators this year. It's one of those things where I'm just not super confident in their defense, even though they have guys like Filip Hronek on defense and possibly even Dennis Cholowski. I'm not super confident on their outlook. I don't necessarily know how bad they'll be. I don't think they'll be. I mean, the Senators are an absolute dumpster fire right now, so I don't necessarily know if they'll be that bad. But the Senators look to have another really bad season this year. But the Red Wings, are probably not going to, bode too much better. this season. So I predict them to have something kind of similar to last season. I would predict somewhere
70,
between
75 points.
Yeah, I would predict somewhere between 65 and 75 points this season for the Red Wings. Nothing too crazy. I don't really expect them to go, anything crazy. I expect probably another 30-goal season from Larkin, probably around 70, 80 points from Larkin at max, and then, possibly somewhere close between Mantha and Anthony as well. I think Mantha could crack over 30 goals this season if he's healthy. Anthony I don't see quite getting there again, but it's definitely possible. They're moving him back to wing, so I definitely think he could flourish there instead of him playing center now that they have Filipino on the roster. So it'll be interesting to see what the Red Wings do going forward. But again, I think between 65 and 75 points, anywhere probably in that 30 win range, a little bit below that, you'll probably see from the Red Wings this season. So nothing too crazy, but you'll probably see another high draft pick this year, unfortunately.
It's still definitely a rebuild, but correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like the rebuild's going a lot better for the Red Wings than, say, the Tigers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think their rebuild is on the right track. Like I said, Moritz Seider has looked really good. I think they drafted a lot of defensive prospects. They'll lose a lot of guys on defense next season, so it'll definitely be interesting to see how the Red Wings choose to sort of plug and play on defense there, going forward. But I think their rebuild's going really well. Zadina looks fantastic. Same thing with Veleno. Like I said, Seider looks really good. Some of the other prospects like McIsaac down. I don't think he plays yet in Grand Rapids, but he's looked really good. Alec Regula as well. All really good prospects on defense there. I'm really excited for the development. I think Giovanni Smith, someone who looked really good in camp, I think he could possibly, crack his way. He could finally make it past Grand Rapids and ended up actually making the main roster. He's sort of a gritty guy that plays wing. And I think he could potentially make the roster. Ryan Kuffner looks really good. Taro Hirose. Multiple guys are sort of poised to make the main roster, possibly. You'll see a lot of them sort of interchange in between Grand Rapids and Detroit this season. So you'll probably see a lot of new faces, which I'm always excited to see. Prospects up and down. Any guys getting their chance, I always think is really cool to see new faces in the main roster sort of getting their opportunity. So, look forward to that this season for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely still a lot to be ironed out, but there's a positive horizon in the future for the Detroit Red Wings. So let's move on to our fifth and final story of the night. We're going to preview the Eagles game, the Lions-Eagles game for next week. And I think at the end, why don't we give a prediction for what we think the score will be?
Yeah, so the Lions have a big game this week against the Eagles. I believe the Lions are an underdog heading into the game. I believe it's a 7 to 7.5 point spread in favor of the Eagles heading into that game. But surprisingly, the Philadelphia Eagles did not hold practice today. They actually did a walkthrough today with instead of practicing because the amount of injuries they have on the current roster. Deshaun Jackson has already been ruled out for Sunday's game. I believe he has a calf issue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he does.
Or no, it's abdomen. Sorry, it's Alshon Jeffrey who has a calf issue.
Alshon is probably going to be out. I know that because he's on my fantasy team.
Yeah, so it's not really looking good for Eagles wide receivers here. Deshaun Jackson is their deep threat. He's the one.
If your
who
name
can
is
stretch
Nelson
the field.
Aguilar, but I think he's questioned too.
Too. All the questionable players right
Holy
now
crap.
they have Dallas Goedert, Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Corey Clement, Tim Jernigan, Jordan Mailata.
I think Timmy Jernigan broke
Derek
his foot
Barnett,
or something.
Fletcher Cox, Jonathan Cyprin, Rudy Ford, Nathan Jerry,
Oh my god.
Kamu Grugier Hill,
long
and
is this
Nate
list?
Sudfeld is my list that I'm reading right now.
Oh
The
my
players who are
God.
not practicing right now for the Eagles, and clearly the Eagles didn't practice at all today because they did a walkthrough. But still, that's a scary amount of injuries for.
Who does Carson
the
Wentz
Eagles
have
there.
to throw to? Darren Sproles?
I think definitely being without Deshaun Jackson will hurt the Eagles. He is the one who stretches the field for them. He's their deep threat. So, that's one less person for the Lions to cover. And they also said that Alshon Jeffrey, who's basically their number one wide receiver, might not play in that game. So that severely hinders Carson Wentz's ability in that football game. Definitely, interesting to see how he'll do without him, without some of his top receivers there. The Lions have a couple injuries headed in the game as well. Jared Davis is still limited. He hasn't really practiced much since hurting himself in the preseason, but he's making good progress. I'm not really sure if he'll end up playing this week, but it's definitely a possibility. I think they'll probably keep him out until after the bye, which makes most sense so he can fully recover. But maybe we'll see him before that. Taylor Decker still has that back injury from last week that we haven't seen him since.
Good. Keep him out.
Deshaun Hand is still dealing with the elbow injury that we might not see him for a while. I believe his injury isn't bad enough to be put on IR, if I'm not mistaken, but it must be bad enough he hasn't played in the first 2 weeks, and they've sort of been missing that pass rush from Deshaun Hand. And then CJ Moore is a safety. He's had a heel issue. He's a big special teamer for the Lions, and he had limited practice today as well for the Lions. So definitely a shorter injury list there for the Lions, but overall, I think Detroit definitely has the big favor there. I know the Eagles are a big favorite, but I think I'm pretty confident right now the fact that Matthew Stafford and the Lions offense will have a good day. Removing some of those threats on offense will help, the Lions defense as well. They obviously I can't remember their rookie running back's name. They have Jordan Howard and then Miles Sanders is who I'm thinking of. Sanders will be a huge asset for that game. He's a pretty scary target, a running back. Carson Wentz always really good as well. That'll definitely be an exciting game. I think it'll be really close. I think it'll be a big offensive scoring game, despite the lack of offensive talent that the Eagles have currently healthy on their roster. But I still think it'll be a back and forth battle. Hopefully the defense can hold up for the Lions and can have a strong showing against Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think with that 7.5 point favorite that you're talking about, I'm definitely going to be putting some money on the Lions this week. I don't know if you're a betting man, but if you are, I might do the same. Do you have a prediction for the week?
I definitely think it'll be tough. I think I'm going to say 27-20 Detroit. I think Detroit doesn't end up picking up this game. I think it'll be pretty close, like I mentioned, but I think Detroit does have a little bit of an edge here. Because of the lack of offense and the amount of injuries from the Eagles.
Yeah. If I'm going to give a prediction, I feel like Matthew Stafford's going to have a big day. I don't know why. I think he's going to score about 3 touchdowns. So I'll put the Lions somewhere 27. And let's give the Eagles, because that offense is so beat up, man, I want to say 27-14, but that just seems too bold. What do you think?
No, 27-14 isn't bad. I'm not really sure how the Eagles offense will necessarily do. They might struggle. Carson Wentz did have a little bit of a rough week last week until the second half. He still has Zach Ertz out there as well. Always a big target. I'm sure he'll see a lot of targets this week. So if you have Zach Ertz in fantasy, be sure to start him if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't play either. And be sure to possibly pick up Nelson Aguilar off of waivers if he's available. Or just start him if you have him on your roster, because they are struggling at the wide receiver position. So any target that Carson Wentz has open today on Sunday will be a strong fantasy score, possibly against the Lions. The Lions need to limit that offense as much as possible. But in terms of fantasy, the players like Zach Ertz do have high upside for that game.
Absolutely. All right, well, that wraps up our countdown for the week. Before we go, Chase, you want to tell the people where they can find you?
Yes, you guys can follow me at Chase Sussex on Twitter, ChaseSussex on Twitter. You guys can shoot me any questions you guys have over there. You guys can also follow my other podcast on Twitter at Hockeytown Rundown, Hockey TWN Run DWN. Once the Red Wings season starts to kick off, we will have plenty of content for you over there. We actually had Jay over there at training camp last weekend. And he was, getting videos and taking notes for our next podcast. So look out for that one.
And you can find me at David Rosenberg. That's ROSENBERGG on Twitter. Make sure you're following our main site's Twitter account at Mich Sports Ent. That's at MICH Sports ENT. And of course, make sure you're following us at MSE Countdown, engaging with us. We love to talk to you guys about all things Detroit sports. We're going to try to be using that a whole lot more. Of course, it's the place where you can find all of our podcasts or on transistor.fm. Until next time, guys, we'll see you later.
Peace.